Happy Mother's Day. For real, happy Mother's Day. I didn't realize this is gonna sound. I'm just gonna say it the way that it's coming to my brain, and just don't take it the wrong way. I didn't realize how impactful and important and powerful and awesome moms were until I got married, and then we had a kid, you know. And my wife every night. Right now we just had a second one, so we put Nora to sleep, feed the baby, do all of that stuff, and then every night she cleans the house. So like you walk into the kitchen and it's like spotless. Not everybody does that. She's got her own special brand, you know. But every mom does something like that. And it's stuff like that you don't notice growing up. That's like, it's habit forming and it's life changing and it's important. It seems silly. Like why, some of you are like, well, why does it matter that the kitchen's clean? It's not that the kitchen's clean, it's that the day's done and it's done correctly. And I didn't recognize those lessons until I watched them with my own eyes with my wife. So what I want to say is to all the moms out there, thank you. There's something you do that's special that changed your kid's life that you didn't even think about. All right? So happy Mother's Day. And we have plants for you. Yes. Hopefully you don't kill plants. If you do, sorry. You can take a picture. We have pictures too. So otherwise, if you don't like pictures and you don't like plants, we're really sorry. Happy Mother's Day. All right, so today we did this thing when we were writing sermons. Sometimes we get in there to write sermons and, there's like, I don't know, 10 or 12 of us, and collectively we do something stupid. And we did this thing that for everybody in the room is highly challenging and potentially stupid. We decided we were going to do one sermon on the Sermon on the Mount. And if you're not familiar with the Sermon on the Mount, it's really the first sermon Jesus preaches, and it pretty much lays out, how you're supposed to act as a Christian, and it lays out pretty much everything. And it's 3 chapters in Matthew, and so we're going to be here till about 1:45. And if you have lunch. No, I'm gonna camp in one spot in the Sermon on the Mount, but it's a lot of ground to cover, and so if we weren't going to do that, but this is something that I would say, read, right? So, look, I get it. A lot of people come to church, they get their Jesus, and then they wait till next week. You know what I mean? But like, if you really want to know what this is all about, you really want to know what it looks like to act like and be a Christian, the Sermon on the Mount is a really solid place to start. Jesus sums it up really well. I want to start with a story that has nothing to do with the Bible. Welcome to church. All right, so in the 1840s, 1850s, there was a guy, you probably know who he is. His name's Ulysses Grant. So this guy was an army officer. And he went to West Point. He became an army officer. He ended up in the Mexican-American War, and he served under a guy named Winfield Scott. And then after that war, what happens oftentimes in America with the war is they reduce the size of the army. Guys end up leaving. There's no opportunity for advancement, whatever. So Grant leaves the army and he ends up working in a store because his dad had owned a store. He was like a middle-class dude, wasn't special. And back in the day in the army, that actually mattered. So if you came from money, or you came from a family with a name, or if you came from an army family, right, then you got favoritism. You moved up the ranks better. You did better because you had that prestige. He didn't have any of that, so he left, right? And he went back to, I think, Missouri, and started working in a store. The store failed. and he ended up in debt. Civil War comes around, and basically he didn't start out serving in the army in the Civil War. He had a failed store. He was a failed business owner. He was trying to figure out what to do. And then on top of that, there's rumors he was a drunk, right? And so he ends up back in the army. Meanwhile, on the East Coast, because he's out in what would have been at the time the West, on the East Coast, there are generals that are running the Union Army. One of them being Winfield Scott. By this time, he's really old and really didn't have the energy to do so. Another by the name of George McClellan. And then another guy named, I think it was Joe Hooker, right? Fighting Joe Hooker. And so here's the problem with those three guys. Winfield Scott didn't have the energy to run the army. He did a really bad job. McClellan was so obsessed with his reputation that he did nothing. And Hooker, his name was Fighting Joe Hooker, he liked to fight, but he was really bad at it. He's a bad general. And so the first few years of the Civil War, Lincoln is racking his brain. What are we going to do? We have more resources. We have more people. We're right. And we might lose because we have no leadership. Meanwhile, on top of all that, you add to the problem that Lincoln is a nobody from nowhere who has no standing with the army. So anytime he disagrees with these guys, even though he's the president, sometimes they just do what they want, right? Until Grant gets back in the army, he starts to rise up the ranks, and he ends up leading the army in the Battle of Vicksburg, and they win. And then over the course of the next few months, Grant makes his way over the East Coast. He ends up in charge of the Army of the Potomac, and the rest is history. The Union ends up winning. During this course, though, as Lincoln is elevating Grant, they say, listen, this guy's a nobody and he's a drunk. Why are you doing this? And Lincoln's answer is, tell me what he drinks, because I need 100 more of them. He fights. He fights. And I have this thing about where we're at in the church today, and I think that we tend to do what the bad generals did, and not do what Grant did. So as the church, this is what we tend to do. We either engage in a way that's not strategically sound. So when it comes to culture, right, we either engage in a way that's not strategically sound and kind of stupid, or we do nothing. Like, that's where we're at as a church, as not this church, but as the church, the Big C church in America, in today's culture. We don't engage with culture all the time in healthy ways, and then sometimes we just disconnect altogether. And neither one is any good. Neither one is any good. It gets us nowhere. It's why we're in the middle of huge cultural upheaval, and everybody in the church is looking around like, well, where's the pastor that's going to lead this? Well, he's not there. She's not there because we disconnected or we scream too much. Pick one. They're not there. And over the course of American history, there's always been a minister at the forefront of these social upheavals, and it's been a guiding light. That's the whole point. We're going to be talking about salt and light. That's the whole point of what we do as Christians, is to be a guiding light, and we don't have that right now. Why? Because we either fight or we run. We either fight poorly or we run. We don't engage in healthy ways. So, I'm just setting the stage for the rest of this. You're going to feel like I'm jumping and like, well, why do you tell that story? I'll get to it in a minute. But let me read from the Bible real quick. This is Matthew chapter 5. We're going to start in verse 3, and we'll end up at 16. So Jesus starts out, he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil things against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So this is how Jesus starts the Sermon on the Mount. And what he's doing here is what a lot of preachers do. He's getting the crowd riled up a little bit. He's affirming them. You know what I'm saying? Like the opposite of what I just did. You know what I mean? That's what he's doing. He's affirming them. And he's saying, like, you may have all of this stuff going on in your life, but here's the flip side of the coin. This is what God's going to do for you, right? And then verse 13, he says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So, what's Jesus saying here? Well, he starts out by affirming them, and then he's setting up what's going to be the rest of his message. And he sets it up by saying, you are the salt of the earth. So, a lot of times when this gets unpacked, you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world. What we do in the church is we take that for granted. Does that make sense? Like, you hear that in a church setting, and this is what happens. You're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world, and we're like, yeah, we are. That's awesome. But are we? But do we? Because Jesus gives the flip side of this coin. You're the salt of the earth, but if salt isn't salty, it's useless. It's just dirt. You're the light of the world, but if it's hidden, it's useless. A city on a hill can't be hidden, but a lamp can be put under a basket. Right? And so, I think what we do is we take for granted that we can change the world, but then we never do the things that will. We take for granted that God has put the power of the Holy Spirit in us, and that we have the almighty God of the universe backing us up, but then we act like it doesn't make a difference. So the first thing here is, the first point is, don't be useless to people, add value to them. So you hear that, man, what a Mother's Day message. I should have thought about this a little different. That's all right. Don't be useless to people. That sounds very harsh. But I'm just taking it from the way that Jesus is talking about it. Salt that's lost its saltiness is what? It's useless, right? Don't be useless to people, add value to them. So let me unpack this for a minute. Salt back in the day, first of all, preserve things. Like nowadays, we run away from salt, you know what I mean? Because it's super plentiful, and if you have too much of it, then you'll have like high blood pressure, or you'll get like a dehydration headache, you know what I mean? Anybody had too much bacon and then got a headache? You know what I'm saying? All right. It's happened to me, I don't know. Barbecue, same thing, right? Somebody put a little too much of that dry rub on there. But nowadays it's super plentiful, but back then it wasn't. So salt wasn't really plentiful until the Industrial Revolution. So that would have been in the 1800s. You're talking back in ancient times, salt wasn't, first of all, it was used as a currency in some cases. It wasn't as valuable as gold, but the means to obtain salt were very similar to gold. You had to kind of mine for them. You had to go to natural places where salt would develop on the surface and collect it. And so he's not just talking about, in our context, table salt that makes things more flavorful. That's not what he's saying. He's saying you're the salt of the earth, like you are what's bringing value here. You are what will preserve the good in this. And you are what will make the good in this better. Because salt does make things better. Can I get an amen? Yeah, that's right. Right? So don't be useless, add value. Salt adds value. In our context, it adds value in terms of flavor, in terms of preservation. But in their context, it added value in terms of flavor, in terms of preservation, as in you don't starve. And it also added value in the sense that it had monetary value. Don't be useless, add value to people. This is huge. Man, so often we walk through life and we look at people in terms of what they'll do for us. Or we look at people in terms of just apathy, like we don't care, right? We look at people in terms of how much we like them. All sorts of things, but we never look at people, maybe never is the wrong term, but it's not often that you find somebody that regularly looks at people and says, how can I add value to you? How can I use what God's given me and help make you better? And when you meet somebody like that, what happens? You want to be that person's friend. 100% you want to be that person's friend. When you meet somebody who's like, man, I just want to add value to you. Like, I just want to help make your life better. You're like, hey, let's get coffee, right? Whereas most people, you would rather not get coffee with, right? You would rather not hang out with. I don't know, maybe all y'all are better people than me. I'm just not like, I'm not, you know, like I'm not the coffee guy. I don't know. I'm just saying, when you run across somebody that wants to add value to someone, it sticks with you. So a good example of this person would be Pastor Curtis, right? We had a conversation right before quarantine happened, and we were talking about, you know, the direction of the church and kind of what we saw coming. And he said, man, I don't know. I'm not sure what's next, but I do know that I don't really want to preach. And I was like, all right. Like, it's not often you hear a pastor say, I don't want to preach, because, like, that's kind of the thing that pastors want to do. And for better or worse, and sometimes it's worse and sometimes it's better, but that's kind of the thing that it's kind of the thing that pastors want to do. And he was like, I don't really want to preach. And I was like, that's weird, man, because you're pretty good at it. And he was like, because I've been doing these cohorts and I can just add so much more value to people if I can get them on a Zoom call or if I can get them in front of me than I can standing on stage. And I understood what he meant. I literally heard him say that and went, that's not true for me. Like, I don't have the social capacity to pull that off, but I get that. And that's super admirable, because most people look at it as like, man, what's going to elevate me? What's going to make me feel better? What do I love? Like, you look at your calling in life, you look at the things you want to do in your life, and you know, it's what we've been taught to think, like, what makes you happy? You know? But Jesus starts out, like, when he really starts getting down to the nitty gritty for the biggest, like the first sermon he's going to preach, and one of the ones that's probably the biggest in the book, he says, add value to people. He starts there, right? And then he goes on, he says, you're the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see the good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Don't hide from people. Bring clarity to them. So a lot of times, we're useless because we're selfish. And a lot of times, we're useless because we're hidden. So, for me, I wasn't sure if I was going to tell the story or not. So, all of the tough stuff surrounding the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, right? That was like a life-changing period of time for me. And this is just me. If you hear me sounding selfish or whatever, I'm unpacking my brain. Nothing about that was about me, but the experience I went through in that was life-changing, and I'll explain why. Leading a church, you have people that want you to say things. You have people that want you to do things. You have expectations. And in times when it's not that big, you just kind of, you can push them away, you can blow them off, you can walk away, you can stall out. Now some of y'all are upset because you had things you wanted to say or be done. But like there's things that, you know what I mean? You can get away from it. But in a moment like that, it's like, something needs to be said here. And I went through this period where it was like, first of all, who am I to say anything? Like, why do I matter? Because one of the things that annoys me most is like all of a sudden everybody's a PR expert on Twitter. And everybody's got a statement about everything, right? But this is a big deal, and our church needed to know kind of where we stood on things. And listen, I was far from the most important voice there. My dad was at that table, so Pastor Mike's sitting there at that table too. And it's like, so there's that, and then it's like, what do you say too? Because everything's like, this is obviously wrong, but also everything's so politically charged that nobody can tell their rear end from their elbow. You know what I mean? Like just some really smart people saying some really dumb stuff. And and all I wanted to do is hide. Like in that moment, because I didn't know what to say, I didn't know what to do, I didn't know how to handle myself. And we were having meetings about how we were gonna, we said some initial things, but we had some meetings about how we were gonna follow up and what we were gonna do. And there's some training we did on staff, and then there was the special service we did in October, and we were talking about all of that, and some of that it was tough to work through because there's just so many emotions on the subject. And so there was just a moment where I skipped a meeting, and I was like, I don't know, and I hid. I think a lot of us have had some of that reaction in the last year. It's like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I'm not going to engage. I don't know how to unpack this. I don't know. I'm just not going to engage. And that wasn't the right thing for me to do at the time, but I didn't know what else to do. What I know now is hiding's not going to work. And you can sit on either side of the political aisle. Your opinion matters if it's founded in this book. Right? So, like, just straight up, I know this church, and then you got to talk about politics and whatever, but the fact of the matter is politics are in front of us all the time. Because if you don't watch the news, you're on Twitter. And neither one gives better information than the other, by the way, which is terrifying. But no matter what side of the political aisle you sit on, if your opinion is formed out of this book, it matters. And we can come to agreement. We can come to, if not agreement, we can agree to disagree in a loving way. We can make progress if we start here. And the worst thing that we can do in the midst of all of this craziness in our culture is to just hide. What you bring to the table, as long as it's led by the Holy Spirit, it matters. And people that are in your circle, they need to hear your voice. Because what they're hearing right now is people that don't love Jesus and got bad perspective, bad foundations, and they're getting bad advice. They're getting bad judgment. They're getting bad direction. But it's easy to disengage. It's safer to disengage. But disengaging is what got us here. Disengaging is why we look around and we feel like it's chaos. It's because the world's missing the light that's supposed to provide them with clarity. That's you. It's because that city on a hill, in ancient times, a city on a hill, that's a waypoint. If you're walking if Jesus is walking out in the wilderness and he's looking for the place that he's got to go, and all of a sudden he sees a city on a hill that's got fires on it and lamps lit, that thing will stand out in the darkness, and he knows where he needs to go now. We're supposed to be that. We can't hide. So Jesus sets up his whole sermon with this. You're salt. You're the salt of the earth. You're valuable. People need you. You're the light of the world. You are supposed to provide clarity for people who are lost. You are supposed to be the thing that guides them along the way. And then he ends all of that. Verse 16, in the same way, let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. And then he goes into the rest of the sermon, which is this. I'll give you the quick rundown. So fulfillment of the law, follow the rules, do the right thing, glorify your Father in heaven by doing it. Murder is the next subtitle. Don't murder people. But also, don't think about murdering people because that's not good either. Harboring hate in your heart is bad. Adultery, don't sleep with somebody else's wife. But also, don't think about sleeping with somebody else's wife because that's bad. Divorce, only get divorced under extreme circumstances. But when you do, be honorable about it. Oaths, say what you mean what you say. An eye for an eye, have grace with people. You've heard it said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say turn the other cheek, right? Love your enemies, that stands alone by itself. Love your enemies, right? Giving to the needy, be generous. When you pray, pray simply. Don't be ostentatious. Don't need to sound good. When you fasting, when you fast, don't make a big deal about it. It's about you and God. It's not about everybody thinking you're awesome because you don't eat. Store up your treasures in heaven, not on earth. So keep your mind on things that are eternal and not on things that are temporal, right? Don't worry because God loves you more than he loves all this other stuff he takes care of, so don't worry. When you judge others, use a measure that you want to be judged with. When you ask of God, ask with a heart full of faith and and ask boldly. The way is narrow. When you get to 7, he talks about there's a narrow gate. Wide and broad is the road that leads to condemnation, but narrow is the gate that leads to heaven, right? So try to do the right thing. Try to stay on the right path. True and false prophets, watch out for people who are saying things that don't make any sense. In other words, don't go to Benny Hinn's church, you know what I'm saying? If your preacher's got a jet, think twice. True and false disciples. Not everybody who acknowledges God actually believes in God. And then he ends it by saying that if you listen to what he has to say, you'll be like a wise builder who built his house on rock. But if you hear what he has to say and you don't listen, you'll be like a fool who built his house on sand. How we're supposed to act. That's called holy living in the church. We call that holiness, right? We call that, it's being set apart to do the work of God. That's what we're supposed to be. And that's what Jesus lays out in the rest of his sermon, is how you're supposed to act, how you can be holy and righteous and set apart to do the work of God. But he precedes it with salt and light. So holy living, I wrote this down. Holy living isn't intended to prove the worth of a Christian. It's meant to bring glory to God by adding value and providing clarity for the lost. By adding value to, I forgot the two. By adding value to and providing clarity for the lost. And you may think like, okay, Robert, this is a stretch. It's not. It's not a stretch. Salt of the earth. Salt adds value. The salt adds value to everyone. Everyone needs it. It's a common thing. He did that on purpose. Light of the world. Everyone needs light to shine a direction. Everyone needs light to provide them clarity for what they're looking at. It's everyone. So, for so long in the church, what we've done is we've tried to live holy so that we could win the points contest. You know what I mean? How many times, if you're not a long-time Christian and you're like, man, he's trashing these folks, this is uncomfortable, sorry. If you're a long-time Christian, though, I'm going to keep going. So, thank you. If you're a long-time Christian, how many times you heard, that's another jewel for your crown in heaven? Who cares? How self-centered is that? How on earth could that possibly be holy? How on earth could that possibly be you acting as a person who is set apart to do the work of God, right? It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about glorifying God by loving and serving his creation. That's it. I got another story for you. So in the late 50s, there was a huge earthquake in Anchorage. It was like the largest earthquake ever recorded on the American continent, and ever recorded on the American continent. And so at the time, Anchorage had just gone from a frontier town to like a legit town. So Alaska had just gained statehood, and like probably 10 years earlier, Anchorage was dirt roads and like log buildings. And they started to build real buildings, and they started to build a real town. And so it went from a frontier town to a town of about 100,000 people. And people were moving there. It was a boom town. There were jobs, there was money to be made, and there were things to be done, and so people were moving there. And then this earthquake hits. And there happens to be, in the middle of this earthquake, this lady named Jeannie Chance. So Jeannie Chance was from Texas, and she had gone to college. She had gotten like a communications degree, but then, it was the late 50s, early 60s. She became a homemaker. Here was the problem. Her husband was a bad used car salesman. And there's no indication that I know of that it's bad in terms of he was a liar. It was bad in terms of he was always broke. And when he wasn't broke, he spent all his money before he got home. And so she had to go get a job. And, you can imagine it's a frontier town. It was a conservative time. And so everybody's like, well, why is this lady trying to get a job? But she did a pretty good job. She got on the radio with one radio station, and she did pretty well. But then her husband started doing better with the used car sale, so he got her to quit. Then she got another job at the radio station because they went on hard times again. So she's working at this radio station. I don't remember which radio station it is. I probably should know that. But she's working at this radio station when the earthquake hits. And she happens to be at the time driving by the brand new JCPenney building. So JCPenney shows up, they build a department store, and it makes Anchorage like a legit city. You know what I mean? I don't know if you've ever been in a town when it got its first Walmart, but it's kind of like that. And so she's right by the JCPenney building with one of her kids, and the earthquake goes off, and the JCPenney building starts falling down. And she at first doesn't understand what's going on. She's like, oh, no. And then she gets her kids, she goes home, and then she runs to leaves her kids with the neighbors and runs to the public safety building where the fire department and police department are located. And she's communicating with the radio station the whole time. They eventually get a trailer brought out, and they get the radio going, and she ends up on the radio through the whole ordeal. And while she's on the radio, she's calling out for rescue teams to come look for people. She's coordinating. This road's closed, that road's closed. She's figuring out damage reports from places and reporting it back because it's Anchorage. It's a frontier town. There's no phones. There's no nothing. The only communication is the radio. And so she does all of this stuff, and then night falls. And when night falls, calls start coming in. How's my cousin? How's my aunt? How's my uncle? How's my mom? We don't know how they're doing. And so she starts calling out, this person's okay. This person's okay, because they start getting reports back. And by the time the night is over, she is reporting on the earthquake and on whose family members are okay. And it's being sent from radio station to radio station all the way to the East Coast. So this is a lady who just moved into town that nobody thought should have this job. And she's changing lives in this moment because there are parents who know that their children are okay. But more importantly than that, there are rescue teams that get together and start pulling people out of buildings. 5 people died in Anchorage. The worst earthquake on the American continent. 5 people in Anchorage die. That's nuts. Shouldn't have happened. It was the 50s. The buildings weren't ready for it. But because the rescue squads got there, very few people were trapped in the rubble and died. She made a huge difference. She helped people's lives. She saved people's lives, right? She did that. She was able to do that because she saw the situation. And even though what culture would have told her to do at the time is hide, because you're a woman, it's a man's job, she didn't. She also did that because she saw people and she wanted to add value to this situation. That's all she wanted to do. She walked into this situation wanting to bring value and clarity, and she did that. There's a book called This Is Chance that's written about her and that whole thing. The sense of urgency that she brought to the situation obviously is because it was an earthquake, right? That's what we do in earthquakes. Not just earthquakes. I've never been in an earthquake. In natural disasters, in times of need, good people step up and they do things. They do what needs to be done. But what if we walked into every day with that type of urgency and that type of clarity? What if we walked into our workplace going, who can I add value to and who can I light the way for? Because ultimately, all the things you do to be a good Christian, you do those to support that mission. That's how you glorify God. That's how you change the world. That's how you make a difference. You know, we don't abstain from drinking and chewing and dating girls that also chew, just so that we can be good people. We do it so that because we're good people, God can be glorified and people that are lost can see the way and their life can be better, you know? I've been harping on the same thing for 20 minutes, so I'm gonna wrap it up, but I'll just say this. We can't continue to live in a spirit of fear. And I'm not talking about mass, I'm not talking about any of that. I'm saying we can't continue to live in a spirit of fear in terms of our reputations. We have to stand up. We have to be the ones that know what's right. We have to be humble about it. But we have to speak, and our words have to be based from here. The world needs us. And honestly, we need the work. The church has gotten far too lazy. We need to put hand to plow and get some things done. So, happy Mother's Day. Next year I'll plan that better. Let me pray for you. God, forgive us for the times that we've hidden or been selfish. Let us walk into each day with urgency and clarity and purpose. God, let us live our lives in the way that you prescribe for us to live them, not so that we can add another crown to our, or another jewel to our crown in heaven, or we can grow the mansion, or blah, 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 but so that when people look at us, they'll see you, and then when they see you, their lives will change, because ultimately, God, being with you in heaven is reward enough, but here on earth, we have a job to do. And God, I just pray that you'd give us wisdom as to how to approach things. God, I pray that we wouldn't, that as a church, we wouldn't run into things being dumb and yelling and screaming and fighting, but also, God, that we wouldn't hide from things either, but that we'd walk into it with measured wisdom. And God, just so that we could help people and that we could help our community and that you would be glorified through it. We love you and we thank you. Amen.